Well, hi everybody, it's the Week in the Tackle podcast, the podcast where we look back at the previous week in football and/or soccer and tackle the things that we thought were interesting. I'm Tom Rennie. Alongside me is US soccer legend and the impossibly young broadcaster, Mr. Dunny Brian Dunny Dunseth. Hello, mate. You all right?
You know, Dunny is, I guess, the perfect description for today, for the amount of horse we shall be shoveling, sorry, Tim, for the next 40 or so minutes. This is going to be a blast, isn't it?
So, if you're new to the podcast, we just look back at the things that have happened, and sometimes it's Premier League, sometimes a big MLS story, sometimes a major tournament's happened, sometimes the US men play at the old Soccerino. And, you know, if you're new to the show, what happens is Dunny tells me how it's a golden generation of talent, and I tell him, I'm not sure they're as good as maybe Crystal Palace. And that's kind of how it goes on a regular basis. I may win this time, I don't know, but for the fact that actually right now, Crystal Palace are quite good. So we're going to talk about the US men, what happened and where we go from here. We're going to talk about England because that was a cluster, sorry, Tim, on Saturday at the weekend. So I want to talk a bit about that. Or Sunday, and then a few heroes and villains from the week. Loads of little stories that are worth grabbing and drawing your attention to. So we'll do that in around about 40 minutes or so. Firstly, have you ever been called into a review by your manager and you thought to yourself, oh, this fucking guy, sorry, Tim. And he would have all this manager speak like, we need to get together vis-a-vis and things like that, you know, full on David Brent stuff. Yeah. Well, Dunny, it is time for our friend Greg Berhalter, speaking of Crystal Palace, to sit down with the middle managers that run US soccer and have a comprehensive review over the next, judging by the last couple of comprehensive reviews, 12 to 15 months to decide what steps they're going to tread next in the near future of US men's soccer. So, look, the Uruguay game, I want to get your view on it, obviously, because you would have watched it in great detail. Me not really caring one way or the other. I actually thought they played pretty well against Uruguay, who are a really, really good team. Maybe to this point, the best team who've played in Copa America. Arguable point, sure, whatever. But I think they've been really, really good. Really, really impressive. Yeah. And the way they played, the way they set up, maybe not as many chances as the US fans would have wanted. I get all that. But it was actually a pretty decent performance, but it has led to quite the meltdown this week. Tell us why.
Yeah, it has for obvious reasons, because it is 100% a failure to not get out of this group. Again, we talk about God-given right. You know, we do this thing where when the draw comes out, you're like, oh, this is amazing. You play Bolivia, one of the worst teams in CONMEBOL. You warm yourself up in the tournament. Get the early goal, end up 2-0. But didn't really feel as dominant maybe as we thought it would look, and give credit to Bolivia because they made it difficult at times. Panama, a team that we've beaten, a team that's also beaten us, but still, it's Panama. And then it's Uruguay, and Uruguay, top spot in the group, and then we'll figure out, knowing that it's Brazil and or Colombia, depending upon how that group looks. We kind of had this idea, or at least this identity of an idea of how we were going to see the progression. And what Greg Berhalter told us, what US Soccer told us, was kind of the first walkthrough of what 2026 was going to be, hosting the World Cup here in the United States alongside Mexico and Canada. And we were told the importance of this because of this generation. I don't like golden generation. I understand why it's been talked about, and it's because of this group of players on the backside of failing to qualify for the 2018 World Cup. Everything in US soccer was burnt to the ground. It was built back up. Ernie Stewart was named the general manager. Took 6 months to get through the door. To your joke earlier, Greg Berhalter was named head coach after whittling down the best perceived best managerial candidates. It took him another 6 months to join up because he had to finish his contract with Columbus Crew. And then he went through the World Cup. And the biggest thing for me is Greg Berhalter didn't become a bad coach overnight. There's nothing that has made Greg Berhalter worse than what he was before this group reconvened ahead of the Colombia game. The reality is that you had 5 games. And we kind of knew coming off Nations League that this 5 games could potentially determine if he was going to be the manager at the World Cup. And by the way, that's still a really big job. You know, when we talk about who could fulfill that role, and I know we'll get into it, It's the coach of the U.S. men's national team hosting a World Cup. I would imagine there's plenty of people, whether international caliber managers or domestic managers, that would be heavily influenced by the thought and the idea of doing something that is such a massive, massive moment, especially here in the States. But as I kind of walk back and I go through the timeline, I look back, and Nations League, certainly the best of the CONCACAF region with Nations League after winning 3 consecutive Nations League trophies. Gold Cup is kind of locked in at the number 2 most valuable. But there's a problem. And the problem is because you don't have World Cup qualifying, you're not going to get too many games. And by that, I mean, when UEFA decided that, or FIFA, UEFA conjunction, they decided that they were going to make tournaments matter. They were going to create Conference League. They were going to create Nations League. They were going to try to figure out how to monetize it and add more teams and make it bigger and better and grandiose. Well, the reality is they've actually weakened, in a lot of ways, the opportunity and the idea not only to have managers bring in new players and look at different players, but also create bigger and more important international friendlies. Because if you're not going to have a CONMEBOL World Cup qualifier, there's a good chance that CONMEBOL teams are going to stay in Europe. If you're not going to have a Nations League qualifier, there's a good chance that those big teams and heavy hitters are going to play each other. So the U.S. gets Germany and it gets Ghana. You go back to the fall. First good 45 minutes against Germany. Second half, some substitutions. It's a friendly. They end up losing. Second game against Ghana. They I think, fixed everything that wasn't ideal against Germany. They completely dominate Ghana. But then we're told, well, it's not that good of a Ghana team. So then we go through Nations League. Then we get to Colombia. Colombia, it's 2-1. You feel momentum's on your side. Tim Weah gets stripped. All of a sudden, it's 3-1, ends up 5-1. Everything lights on fire. The Brazil game, I thought was a really good performance against Brazil. Ends up 1-1. Alisson stands on his head. Matt Turner stands on his head. And overall, a good game. But then when you get to the Uruguay game, I agree with you. And I'm glad that you said it because it's not coming from an Americana homer like myself. I think if you individualize the silos of what kind of transpired in this moment of leading to the dire situation we're in, the Uruguay game on its own was a really good game. And we can talk about referees and that referees have something to play, VAR has something to play, but it doesn't matter because the United States still needed to score. They didn't score. That's a problem. It's still an issue of figuring out ways to consistently find the back of the net. But the game itself, mano a mano, I thought they played pretty well. But you go back to the moment that Tim Weah and the red card happens, it completely changes the dynamics of the group. Weston McKennie's goal being judged offside. Blackman clattering into Matt Turner with no yellow card. All of a sudden, everything emotionally amps up. The red card happens, and you quickly transition into a dynamic that you didn't imagine yourself in. And we could talk about the substitution patterns at halftime. We could talk about the shape and identity. I still don't think you go to 5 in the back, but he chose to. I thought maybe you played Eunice and Johnny as opposed to taking off both Tyler and Gio and putting Cameron Carter-Vickers in. That's a conversation for another day. But the reality is, if we step back and we say, as a collective whole, is this good enough? That's where the question for Matt Crocker, who, by the way, Wales, England, Southampton, the guy that chose Greg Berhalter to be rehired as his first signature hiring, is he the right guy going forward? Is there someone else better for the job? And how much culpability is inside U.S. soccer for the situation that they find themselves in currently?
A few things on this, and I agree with everything you said there. There's a really interesting story of the last 12 months when it comes to the US men. But if we just focus solely on the Copa America games, that Panama game, you picked out a few moments of it there. If you look at the European Championship as a comparative competition, Netherlands came third, Georgia came third, Slovakia came third, Slovenia came third. And you were able to, as a best third place finisher, get out of your group in the European Championship. The Euros have been expanded for financial reasons. It's the money you moron. And almost everyone bar Scotland has gone out of the group, right? By design.
Yeah.
So by that metric, Copa America is tougher because there is punishment for coming third in the group, which makes that second game so much more vital than, for example, England's second game against Denmark, where they were absolutely atrocious and didn't win the game, and everyone's hair, if they were lucky enough to have it, was on fire.
The
Hashtag the
Bulls
Bulls
win
will
again.
win. The Bulls will win. I love you, Arnie Slot. Another one of our boys in there. Come on, Greg. Do it for the Bulls. Don't let some head in. So it's tougher. That second game was all important. I want to talk to you a bit. We spoke about the red card last week, so I don't want to do too much on that. But like when it comes to the review they're having, surely part of the conversation will be, well, that's football, because nothing ever goes perfect in football. It didn't go right for Didier Deschamps at the World Cup when he lost the final against Argentina, nor the previous European Championship when they'd won the World Cup the one before that. So surely moments like there was no legislation for Tim Weah doing what he did. And I don't want to make this a whole, and I know you don't as well, like Tim Weah cost us the Copa America, because it's unfair, right? We did that a lot last week. It's an unfair thing. However, he did. What he
Actions
did
have
in that
consequences.
moment. Yeah, look, I don't want to put it all on one person's shoulders. However, that brain aberration led to Greg Berhalter doing what 90% of managers in the world do in that scenario. They went ultra defensive to try and navigate their way through the game and tried to Sean Dyche one with Ricardo Pepe's effort later in the game. 90% of managers do it. Whoever comes in to replace Greg Berhalter, unless you get a genius like Bielsa or Klopp or whatever, they're probably going to do more or less the same thing. I'd tell you David Moyes would have done it. I'd tell you Gareth Southgate would have done it, you know, for a couple of people just that come quickly to my mind. So will that come into the conversation, do you think? That he'll say, look, the first game we won, the second game we competed against the best team in the tournament, the third game even, and the second game, what was I meant to do? Our own player, our bed. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly will. Whatever this looks like, whatever happens, and obviously you and I are not privy to it, much in the same manner we weren't privy to Matt Crocker's design that ended with Greg Berhalter being the ideal candidate to continue to take on this U.S. men's national team job. There's a couple things at play, right? Number one, it's to your point about Euros. We wake up here in the States and we watch the Euros, expanded format, see these incredible storylines, Slovakia, Slovenia, Romania, Georgia, and all of a sudden we're like, oh my God, they're in the knockout rounds. Psychologically, I don't think if we're doing the math correctly and recognizing, well, there's just 16 games with the addition of what Copa America is, because CONMEBOL, you know? The most difficult thing is you watch Jesse Marsch in the short amount of time and what he's doing with Canada, even though they've scored one goal, that he's figured out a way to navigate that group. That includes Argentina, and he gets through. When you look at what Costa Rica did, when you look at the fact that Panama beat us, and the idea is, you know, if there's a team that you don't want to grind against, you don't want to grind against the CONMEBOL team. Specifically, you don't want to be trying to grind against Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia, even Brazil to an extent, although Brazil has looked a shadow of the Brazil that we kind of like describe verbally and see in our mind when we think about that jersey. If you can take the emotion out of this, which 99.9% of people cannot do,
sure,
you can very easily have a real conversation about why Greg Berhalter deserves to stay on. If you come at it from a place where you're trying to judge the continued evolution and growth of this group, which means you're talking about 21-year-old to 25-year-old players for the most part, outside of Matt Turner and Tim Ream, of the direction of this group is it headed. You could say there's growth. You could see there's continued development. We can talk about the pathway to the national team now being dependent upon being in Europe as opposed to being in Major League Soccer. This ain't U.S. soccer. This ain't MLS's fault. There were more players that played in MLS on Uruguay's team than there was on the U.S. men's national team the other night. And then finally, you know, we've got to make a very clear distinction, because this has been out there for a while. There is no precedence. There is no hard line. There is nothing to do with the men's team that has to do with the women's team. Whatever the financial package is for Emma's Hayes doesn't have to be a matching financial package for Greg Berhalter or whoever. So whether Nike comes in or someone subsidizes, whatever this number looks like, if Jurgen Klopp's your guy, go get Jurgen Klopp. If theoretically Carlo Ancelotti, Pep Guardiola, Jose Mourinho, Yogi Love, Steve Cherundolo, whoever, If that's your guy, go get your effing guy. That's what we always say, right? But short term, you got to start thinking about what this really looks like. You've got 2 years, you've got a Gold Cup, don't have really another major tournament. You've got what? New Zealand, you've got Canada, you've got Panama, rumors of, are you playing at home? Are you being on the road? There's not a lot of great games, not a lot of great games. And so this idea of, oh, we got to strike to play model. Oh, we got to do that. Oh, we've got 2 years. We've got right now 2 calendar years for this group. And I said it on the show this morning on SiriusXM FC. I kind of went through the team. This team, as of now, with Greg Berhalter, this is the group, right? There's nobody challenging Matt Turner in goal.
No,
Anthony Robinson is locked down. Tim Ream, we've been having the same conversation with Tim Ream for the last 4 years. He's the only dominant left foot center back we have. There's no one else pushing through. In big games, he's turned into Tim Ream. Chris Richards is now a solidified starter. Serginho Desters, Joe Scally are the 2 outside right backs, both completely different in their player profile. Tyler Adams is going to start every single game. Weston McKennie is going to start every single game. Gio Reyna is going to start every single game. Yunus Musa is going to probably be either the first sub or the first starter should someone go missing. Christian's going to be wide left. Tim Way is going to be wide right. And then I think in this tournament, it's Flo Balogun proved that he's the starter, like he's the number 9. And then you've got Ricardo Pepi, you've got Josh Sargent. Haji Wright oddly became this left-sided attacking player, even though he got you the goals against Jamaica and started the Nations League final, but that's another comment. So Malik Tillman isn't starting. Cameron Carter-Vickers isn't starting. Ethan Horvath isn't starting. Johnny's not starting. Luca De La Torre's not starting. Who else am I missing? Brendan Aronson's not starting. Josh Sargent's not starting. So when I say there's a ceiling, and people were pissed at me, the glass ceiling is for all these players to break through and to prove to this manager that they deserve. Now, we'll see what happens with the Olympic team. I still think we're going to have some really disappointing decisions by the coach because it's an 18-man roster, 3 overage players, and I think some players that deserve to be on that roster are not going to be there, which means that you are going to miss out on a couple players missing out on what could be similarly replicated of a World Cup format in Paris this summer. And so, yeah, I think ultimately, to your point, if you can take emotion out of it and just talk about the macro level and the micro level of what we saw and justifying it, I could totally see them not making a decision and keeping Greg Berhalter.
Yeah.
But
I think he'll stay. I just think he'll stay.
But I don't see, with the amount of pressure that's on from the media members, which we've never seen before, and the fan base, which includes American Outlaws and the supporter groups making visual and verbal cues of we want to see a new manager, I think it's going to be difficult for Matt Crocker to, and we haven't heard from Matt Crocker other than a statement. I think he has to step up on the dais, take live questions, and answer truthfully as to why he was the right guy and why he would continue to be the right guy should he choose to stay with Greg Berhalter.
I'd be really surprised after an extensive 6 to 8 month comprehensive review if they didn't look back at these 3 games and think, actually, it wasn't too bad, was it? Who would have done better? They'll look at who's better. They can't get someone better, and he stays on to the World Cup. But we shall see. 2 other quick bits, Danny, I wanted to talk about on this game more broadly. I know you've spoken a lot about the game itself a few days ago now as well. And we're not doing the referee, by the way. I'll just throw that in here now.
He was terrible.
He was utterly useless. There's no conversation for us to have about the referee. He was
Yellow
garbage.
Card played advantage. Like, what is happening?
That was so wildly dumb. The Pulisic handshake thing.
Well, did you see what Christian did before? Did you see the video?
Well, when he said go celebrate with the Uruguay fans.
Yeah.
I don't know about that. But I just don't want to get bogged down because we could do that for an hour. But I just think that we're going to be in complete agreement on all of that. So 2 things I did want to get your view on, which I think is slightly more interesting with the time we have. Number 1 is this concept of golden generation, not specifically about this golden generation, because I made my point on that on a Summer Soccer Morning Show on SiriusXM FC earlier in the week. Go to the Twitter page, SiriusXM FC. It's on Thomas J. Rennie. You can see my wider point there. I don't think it is a golden generation because I don't think the tag golden generation is fair. And the reason I wanted to raise that, Dunny, is because I was trying to think back to golden generations of the last 20 or 30 years for different nations. I was recently watching, because it was the 20th anniversary of Sven-Goran Eriksson's England losing to Portugal in the European Championships, the famous Ronaldo Winker game.
Yeah.
And the team, I've not got it in front of me now, I did at the time, but it was Sol Campbell, Rio Ferdinand, Ashley Cole, Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, Frank Lampard, David Beckham, Steven Gerrard,
Rooney.
Wayne Rooney,
Yeah.
and Michael Owen was the team. And I think David James was the keeper. So we
Yeah.
could maybe say David James is the only one there who wouldn't be a Golden Generation player. They won nothing. I was watching Belgium this week, and the Golden Generation is gone, but they had Eden Hazard, Kevin De Bruyne, Romelu Lukaku, Jan Vertonghen, Thomas Vermaelen, Axel Witsel, yada, 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 Thibaut Courtois in goal. That's a Golden Generation. Won nothing. France have got a Golden Generation sort of right now, and yes, they did win that World Cup, sure, absolutely, but since then, didn't win the Euro, struggling this Euros, lost the last World Cup final. So on and on it goes. Everyone's got a Golden Generation. Croatia, another amazing example of they've done reasonably well. Spain have had Golden Generation since the one that won the World Cup and the European Championship. Even to a lesser degree, they're talking about this Georgia team being a Golden Generation of Georgian players. Romania had a Golden Generation team in 1998 with Radachoyu, Dimitrescu, yada, yada, yada. The reason I'm raising all this is because everyone seems to have a Golden Generation. Why are we tossing around the term Golden Generation so liberally? Like, we need something else. We need something else. Now, I know people joked the other day on the show about like Platinum Generation or Tinfoil Generation or whatever. Fine, I'm open to all of this. But don't we, as football commentators, broadcasters, analysts, journalists, and even the players themselves, need to step away from saying Golden Generation about these players until post the tournament when they won it? Because pre-tournament, we need something else. Like, we've got XG, and I hate XG, but I get XG. But everyone started to think, XG doesn't make sense if you play a pass to someone who scores a goal from 60 yards. We need pre-XG or AXG or XG minus or whatever. Why do we keep doing this to ourselves, and how unfair is it? We keep labeling Golden Generations, and then all we could do then is be like, oh, rusted, have they? Like, shoot me now.
By the way, I do like advanced statistics, but did you know XG, the Lionel Messi's right foot is the same XG as Lionel Messi's left foot?
It's good to know. I'll put that in a poster.
Just think about that.
That could be the new cat poster.
There you go.
Hang in there. Lionel Messi's left foot is the same XG as his right foot. Have a great day. Hang in there.
By the way, what is a difficult pass? Like if I flick it or I Cruyff it, or if I like play through four, I don't know. I just have a few questions about that. Anyways, I don't like Golden Generation just because I don't think it fits, but I understand why it's been referenced with this group of players. And specifically, it's referenced to this group of players because of our failure to qualify in 2018. And as we went through the Dave Sarachan to Greg Berhalter, the torch being passed from the I guess, stepping down of Bruce Arena on the backside of not qualifying for the World Cup, what we saw is this young group of players. And I feel as though the terminology of the Golden Generation is because all of these guys are playing in Europe. And we've seen them either develop in the United States and go to Europe, or we've seen them immediately in their kind of end of their youth career go to the United States, and obviously dependent upon dual nationals, who's got passports, yada, yada, yada. I think that still does a disservice to those who kind of laid the groundwork of the days of when the US soccer players actually made it to Europe in the different leagues, because it's much easier now than it was then, just when you talk about sheer numbers and the value of contracts and the value of what dual nationals or work permits now look like compared to back then. That's a conversation for another day. This comes down to hope, pure, dumb hope. We're seeing our guys here in the United States play at massive clubs. We're seeing our guys playing Champions League finals. We're seeing our guys, have pretty decent roles in certain clubs. Now, they're not generational superstars. Well, they are to us when they play in the U.S. men's national team. I mean, we see Christian and these guys front and center on all the commercials that have to do with soccer players in terms of commodities and commercialism. And I understand it. You're selling hope, right? The brands, Nike and Puma and Adidas and all, Volkswagen and all the other stuff, deodorants and hairsprays and whatever else comes in line. So these are branded people. So in our mind, right, when we talk about sports, NBA, NHL, Major League Baseball, all these things, we're used to being the best in the world. So there's like an insecure complex that comes along with that, right? We wake up in the morning and watch Premier League and watch some Liga MX, and then we eat our own when it comes to Major League Soccer and the growth, because no one wants to acknowledge, how far the leagues come, and yet it's still so far away, still can't compete with Champions League because Tuesday and Wednesday nights and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, there's so much hope attached to this group of players, because what the reality is we're kind of in this generation gap. And the generation gap was on that night in Trinidad and Tobago, when you're talking about Tim Howard in goal, and you think about that back line, not specific to that game, but you think about a back line in midfield that's Michael Bradley and a Jermaine Jones and a Clint Dempsey and those type of guys. We had such a high ceiling caliber of player for 2, maybe 3 World Cup cycles, that when you're thinking about a Guggenheim, when you think about Carlos Bocanegra, and you're thinking about DeMarcus Beasley, and you're thinking about all these guys, all of a sudden, when they're gone, who's going to replace them? And that failure of the World Cup was then the chance to, and these are the guys, like this generation, we have a couple different cycles of really, really, really high level potential players. But are we expecting too much of them? And I think that comes back to this conversation about Greg Berhalter. We've proven that we're best in the region, although we're not best in the region because we just lost to Panama in the group stage, but we're best in the region for Nations League. What's the next step? Well, the next step, I think, is when we're watching these CONMEBOL teams face each other or face CONCACAF teams, what have we missed out on? I watched Colombia, Brazil last night. I watch Uruguay, I watch Argentina, I watch all these teams, and you're like, my God, there's always a bump, there's always physicality, there's these little manipulations of the moment, the dark arts, the surrounding of the referees, like they're so used to it. There's not a single one of these CONMEBOL teams that are afraid of any opponent, because they are so used to the operating environment of World Cup qualifiers. You can be in Barranquilla, you can be in Quito, you can be in Sao Paulo, you can be in Buenos Aires. They're not afraid. They've already done it. They've been in Asuncion. They've done all these things. So how do we start with our under 15s, our 17s, our 20s, our 23s, and bleed these kids through? So when it comes to a moment like Panama, when it comes to a moment like Serginho Dest booting the ball to the moon in Trinidad and Tobago, when it comes to Serginho and Weston getting red cards in a Nations League final against Mexico, how do you find those unique moments that you can't replicate in practice? You can't replicate it until it's mano a mano, like I'm going to punch you, I'm going to knock your lights out. In that moment, how do you teach them that this is what you're going to have to deal with? These are the elements that you're going to have to recognize. And that's the differentiator between a win and a draw and a loss, getting to the knockout round, getting knocked out in the group stage.
I was going to ask you another question on this about how damaging it was for the US, but I think you answered it quite well in that answer. So let's move us on. I think we can move us on to something else that will cheer us up a bit more, and that'll be England. Let's talk a little bit about them. Because I wanted to get your view on this.
I'm just going to sound malicious. Any opinion I got, I'm just going to sound malicious.
You know what? Feel free. And you know what? If I don't want you to feel bad about that, so I'll give you some malice myself. Not about you, but as you know, the Rennies have been coming from Scotland for the best part of 200-300 years, and Scotland were in this tournament for about 20-25 minutes. And if you haven't seen the video, I know we spoke about this previously, of Scotland leaving the hotel at the base of Mount Wankdorf, and there's a little brass band as they come out, and like. Every Scotland player is so miserable, like they've just had a late night Wankdorf, and that's all they could do before going home. So it was all very pitiful and pathetic, and Scotland kind of let themselves down with a total lack of bravery in the games. However, because I have the Scottish heritage, I am addicted to Iron Brew, the greatest drink in the world, which I'm drinking right now on the show. And Iron Brew, a very Scottish brand, and they rebranded their cans during the tournament. We can. It's a we can.
We can Iron Brew.
Because it's a we can, but also we can. They're a very witty brand, Iron Brew. You can't. You can't.
You didn't.
In the end. You didn't. You can't. You're already home. And to sound like the England fans who are still there, by the way, Scotland's going home and England's on the piss. Anyway, there's a bit of malice for my Uncle Jim if he's listening, which he does. England were terrible. And I do want to see what you think about it, because I know what I think about it, because I've ranted about it so many times. But for those that haven't heard or read my views, briefly, that the Slovakia game, I think you made a good point earlier on that no one just turns up and rolls over anyone just because of who they are and the badge on the shirt. It's a fantastic point. And it's a point I think always holds water in football. To win, you have to play well or earn it in some way. Take your chance when it comes, whatever it is. But this was so baffling to me, this performance, because at the end of the last game, England had had a big let-off, a huge let-off. Across the group stages, they'd had huge let-offs in how terrible these performances were. But everyone quite rightly goes back to the great Sir Bobby Robson and his quote of, the group stage doesn't matter. That is still qualifying. All you're ever doing is qualifying to get to the knockout stage. And I'm very much on board with that. So Bobby said it, I agree. And then you get to this game, and Slovakia, brilliantly organised team defensively, one or two decent players. I thought Lobotka was a standout on the day. Skriniar at centre-half played pretty good for the time he was on the field. Dubravka in goal, not really tested. Duda, some decent performers, right? So I don't want to discredit them. No Slovakians listening, so actually, fuck them. Sorry, Tim. But they were quite good. Yeah. But the way England set up, right? So Kieran Trippier is not a left back. He doesn't look fit, does not perform well there at any point during the competition. And Mark Gay gets booked on 3 minutes because Trippier gives him a terrible pass back to him. And from that point, it all goes just wrong and worse from there. He gives no support to Phil Foden ahead of him, who is not a left winger and hasn't been, and someone who played on that side for years and years and years, and yet he is still playing there. That didn't work for 1 minute in any of the group games, and it continued. On the other side, Kyle Walker has really struggled. I love Kyle Walker, right? A really good player, a legend in that position, but he's wobbling massively right now. I don't know for what reason, but he's really struggling. So he's not undroppable at this moment. In midfield, Declan Rice is struggling like I've not seen him struggle at any point during his career, and I've seen him play in the flesh hundreds of times, and he is really, really struggling. Kobbie Mainoo played fine. I keep making this point. He's a good player, but he's not someone that you can really build this team around at this point in his career for obvious reasons. The sheer lack of football he's played in his life. Good player, should play again, but there are concerns for me
piece of
there.
The puzzle.
But fine, but if Declan Rice is playing better, I can see it, but he's not, so I don't know. Then you have Jude Bellingham, who was awful in this match. I'm not sure where he's playing or what he's doing or what's wrong, but it isn't working right now. I'm not convinced he's having Gareth Southgate at all. You got Harry Kane, who's really struggling. Bukayo Saka is really struggling. And he's struggling because of the tactics of the team, right? There needs to be pace left. If there's going to be pace right, it's why Saka and Martinelli work so well. Definitely when Jesus is playing, because he will come deep and there's two options. England are not using that. If Kane drops deep and only has Saka as an option, that's all closed down. The midfield doesn't work for various reasons, but I'm not sure where Bellingham's supposed to be playing. And does he work with Phil Foden if they're both going to drift out left? Or suddenly Foden, Kane, and Bellingham are all in number 10 looking forward, and there's only one runner, Saka, who's marked by 3 people. I could go on and on and on here, but I don't want to do this deep sort of tactical analysis. There's so many things that people listening to this could also throw at us, and I'm sure you've got about 10 as well you could do it. But everyone can see it, from former managers to top pundits, to great analysts, to idiots like me, to the fan on the street, to I watched this game with my 3 nephews. One of them is like 9, and he was like, there's nobody on the left-hand side. So how are they going to attack down the left-hand side if no one's down the left-hand side? He's a 9-year-old who's not in senior school yet, and he can see it. There are fans there who can see it. There are people at the box park who still think it's funny to throw alcohol on each other, which, sidebar, was funny for one tournament 8 years ago. Stop it. It's not funny anymore. So my question, Dunny, is why the team, why do you think, because I haven't got the answer. I can identify the problems. There's your diagnosis. He didn't change anything. He only made a change in the game because Kieran Trippier got injured on 60 minutes or so. And even then he brought on Cole Palmer, who made it even more narrow and even less width. And now there's 4 number 10s on the pitch at the same time and nobody running in behind. Not to discredit Cole Palmer, but it was the wrong move because meant we had the same problem with another player in it. And then he makes later changes that are just like, what's happening now? What's happening now? Eze comes on for Mainu. He's another number 10.
Yeah.
Just and then it just do you think, as I do, that Gareth Southgate is, to use a phrase that you gave me, which I love, has twisted himself into such a mental pretzel at this point? He didn't know what to do, so sent them out in the second half and was hoping somebody get injured just so he could then be forced into a change.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. I mean, it can't just solely be down to Luke Shaw being injured, is this kind of cascading amount of issues that then you have. Because Trippier is not going to get forward. He's going to support. He's going to pick his moments. And if it's on, it's on. But it's just going to be variation of service is going to look drastically different than having Luke Shaw out there, right? Foden, is he better on the left-hand side? Is he better on the right-hand side? If he's better on the right-hand side, then are you making a decision between he and Saka? Obviously, you're not. When you think about the players, Cold Palmer, is he a starting player? Is he an impact player? And if he is an impact player, have you already in your mind kind of scheduled at what minute, depending upon what the game is, you're going to bring him on? What about Anthony Gordon on that left-hand side? Thinking about that midfield. Listen, you referenced it earlier. I always think that this is kind of normal issues for England, going all the way back to Lampard and Gerrard. You have extraordinarily talented and successful players with their respective domestic leagues and their respective clubs in England that are some of the best in the world, right? And then they get together, and I mean, we kind of saw this happening. We saw it through the warm-up after the Bosnia game and the Iceland game, and then the invoking of Calvin Phillips's name and talking about the experimentation. If you're at this stage and you already got through the Brazil game a couple months ago and like from March to now, if you don't have an idea of what your best 11 is, or if just one player, one injury changes the complexity of your tactics and your shape and your identity, you haven't been doing your job. You haven't been doing so. Somehow, some way, England, with the lack of consistency in their performances throughout the course of this tournament, has backed themselves into a situation where they could still win it. They could still win it, and it might have taken a bicycle kick, and it might have taken a great start to injure or whatever, added extra time and all of that, where you end up going through. But man, oh man, it feels labored. Everything feels labored, and it doesn't match what we're used to seeing with the visual complexity of face, name, jersey, player profile. We have not seen them put it together at all in this tournament, and it's wild to think about.
One other quick England thing. I don't know if you saw this, but Ed Sheeran visited the England camp this week to play to play a selection of hits from his career. Apparently, if they play this badly in the current game they're playing against Switzerland and still get through, he's going back for the next round. So that's a threat to improve your performance. And I love this. I don't know if you know who James Blunt is. I don't know if but James Blunt was monumentally big with everyone's mum for the best part of about 10 years. What's his song? That big...
You're beautiful.
You're beautiful. Thank you. I was thinking to myself, it probably appeared in an episode of Grey's Anatomy when somebody died that you weren't expecting.
That's such a deep cut reference. I love it right there.
Yeah. And probably true. Someone sent me the episode it happened because it happened. Didn't someone in Grey's Anatomy once envisage they had sexual relations with their dead husband? Isn't that true? I think that happened. Anyway, James Blunt quote tweeted Ed Sheeran. Oh my God, if Ed Sheeran walked into a room and started playing A-Team, I don't know what I would do. It reminds me of when a woman turned up at my house and tried to teach my wife hypnobirthing, and I had to leave the room because I kind of wanted to laugh and punch her at the same time. It was so awful. Anyway, I didn't do either of those things, by the way. I did just leave the room.
Thanks for the clarity.
And pay her the £500. £500 for asking me to envisage myself walking through a field. If I want to do that, I'd watch Gladiator. Anyway.
Did she do it? Did she get the shot or did she go natural?
No, they were both cesarean in the end, so it was a total waste of bloody time. Anyway, James Blunt quote tweeted Ed Sheeran's sing along with the England camp saying, and I'm booked to do the same if they lose against Switzerland, which I thought was absolutely excellent. James Blunt's a funny guy. Wouldn't listen to a single song he ever wrote or played, but funny. Quarterfinals before we reconvene, Dunny. Spain, Germany. Oh, cheeky. Portugal against France, two teams that have been nasty in this tournament, along with England, really bad to watch. Netherlands, Turkey. Turkey beating Austria, one of the surprises, maybe the surprise of the round of 16. Netherlands, again, one of the third-place finishers, so if it was Copa America, they'd be out. And England, Switzerland, Granit Xhaka, maybe player of the tournament to this point for the Swiss. What do you think? What are your thoughts? What grabs you? Who's going to get through? What's the big story?
Yeah, I'm mad at myself because I believed so heavily in Turkey last Euros, and they were diabolically awful. I had gone back and I had stats about their defensive side and how many goals they had and how many clean sheets, and they were going to be incredible. And then that damn little Volkswagen SUV drove the ball out in the field, and everything went to in a handbag really quick for Turkey. Sorry, Tim. So congratulations, even though you should have lost to Austria. Austria should have scored 5 goals in that game, but congratulations anyway.
That's saved, Dunny. That's saved at the end. Oh,
wild. And Goulet is a player. I think Spain, again, visual markers. Spain's been the best team so far in the tournament. They just, on both sides of the ball, look so good, so dominant. But it's still Germany, and who knows which German side is going to show up. Portugal, France. Is Cristiano Ronaldo just going to be crying in the middle of the game again? Or is Didier Deschamps going to pull out an unfiltered red and just flick it in disgust based on how his team's playing? And England, Switzerland, I don't know what to expect. I really don't. I mean, I thought England were out, and then Jude pulls the bike and everything changes in a split second. I did like angry balds leaving the stadium in England jerseys. And then, I having it, mate. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, shit, what happened? Sorry, Tim. So yeah, who knows, man? This is the beauty, as we saw in CONMEBOL, or excuse me, in Copa America. These referees could have an impact. You got a couple of English referees that are going to take a hold of big games, and yeah, we'll see what the VAR implementation, what this all looks like. I don't know. I still think you would think the winner would come out the left-hand side of the bracket between Spain, Germany, Portugal, and France, but with the way this tournament's gone, there's been some major surprises. So we'll see what it looks like.
I still think, even though there has been big surprises and you have all these kind of, oh, but what about this and what about this? I still think it's an England-France final, which is kind of what I thought it would be from the very beginning. And I think England will outhouse their way all the way there. Right, let's do some heroes and villains briefly from the last week. There's loads of little stories that were drawing people's attention to. And I'll start with my hero of the week, Danny. I wanted to get your view on this. So the BBC is covering the games here, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and they're getting big numbers for some of these games. There was one of them did like 10 million that wasn't an England game recently. I forget which one, but I mean, it's doing some serious numbers. It was up against a debate with like Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer for the election, which is tomorrow. We're going to get these populist right-wing out. Sorry, Tim. It actually did 10 million when the leaders of the country, the potential leaders of the country, were debating on the other channel. So maybe that's why I did so well. I don't know. But the reason I wanted to highlight this is because there are people that are having a lot of fun doing live sport when maybe they don't get to do such watch live sport. And specifically, I want to pick out the individual in the graphics room when Cristiano Ronaldo was taking free kick after free kick after free kick after free kick after free kick, and then penalty in Frankfurt, and missing the lot of them. And they were highlighting this on national TV with Alan Shearer doing the analysis, and they put up the graphic, Cristiano Ronaldo. Just so good. Just so good in its crapness. Yeah. Just a crap tabloid pun. That I loved so much, Cristiano Ronaldo. So that person, that man or woman in the graphics room at that point, who was clearly just cracking up to themselves in a control truck somewhere. You, my friend, are hero of the week for me. Danny, what you got?
Yeah, he's definitely a Lionel Messi fan. I can promise you that. I'm going to go with Matty Bogusz from LAFC. Matty Bogusz, Leeds United. Matty Bogusz, Polish under-21 international back in the day. I think maybe deserved a shout to get on that Poland national team. They were terrible in this Euros once again. Matty Bogusz at the start of the season, Tom. LAFC at the MLS Cup final, 5 starters not on the roster, match day 1. 2 substitutes not on the roster, match day 1. I'm not good at live math, so I only went to Cal State Fullerton, pass or fail for 3 semesters. That's 7 guys weren't on the game day roster that participated in an MLS Cup final. Specta, some would say. And here's Matty Bogusz, Steve Cherundolo. Hey, we don't have a number 9. Just play number 9 for a few games. Half a season is, but that I know you're more of an attacking player. You can play wide, you can play in midfield, but like play this position just for me. He's got 11 goals and like 6 assists. A couple weeks ago, I said he should be an all-star. I got laughed about it. He's absolutely flying. He was not named to the all-star team, but he's my hero. He's been, talk about a selfless performer playing at a really high level. There's a reason why Lazio's been linked to him because of his performances. He's built, he's got just all shoulders, hell of a player. So my hero this week's going to be Matty Bogusz. I think he's been fantastic this year for LAFC.
And villains, my villain, I'll give you mine because it's weird. I really don't like the way people on social media, I feel like I could start a lot of things with that sentence, but I really don't like the way that everyone's like, oh, look at the Romania dressing room after they got knocked out. Isn't that hashtag class? They left it like they found it. Losers. No. I appreciate, like, if you've blown your nose, throw it in the bin, but your job was the football match. And yeah, be respectful, sure, to the staff, but you don't clean it like you're the staff. There are staff who are paid to clean it, and so let them do their jobs. Leave it like you've left no stuff in there, sure, but don't polish the floor like you're Cinderella trying to please your ugly stepsisters in the hope she might let you go to the ball. Like, what are you talking about? It annoys me a bit, but fine. You do you. You want to clean up after yourself. That's absolutely fine. Anyone who leaves a bathroom stall worse than they found it deserve 100 years in the bowels of Hades. They sicken me, but fine. It's fine, right? But what annoys me about it is everyone's like, oh, that is class. I don't usually respond to Romania on Twitter, but that is class. It's nothing. It's fine. It's a good thing. It was nice. It shouldn't be a phenomenon that Romania cleaned the floor. It just annoys me. I've seen it so many times today. People have been sending to me on WhatsApps like, oh, you seen this? Won't get that with players these days. Won't get out of England, would you? I don't know. Maybe you would, but I don't expect Jude Bellingham to, I don't know, mop the floor after him because I don't know. It is beneath him, frankly. Your job is to leave the room fine. Like, I don't leave a hotel room and say, sorry, love, can we leave at 11:10? Can you send up a dustbuster? Like, no, it just annoys me. Anyway, it's not class. It's fine.
I do make the bed when I'm leaving the hotel room, and I also put the towels in a pile just to make it easier. That's just me. But I also have an insane OCD with regards to, not leaving things on the floor.
I hang the towels in weird places so they can find them.
Yeah.
So
like a surprise. Surprise.
I'll put one under the sofa. I'll put one in a wardrobe. I'll tie one to a ceiling fan. Screw 'em. Do you have a villain, Dunny? We're nearly out of time.
I'm wrapping that in my brain. Let's just go to the U.S. men's national team. The disappointment. I don't know if they're villains per se, but villainous with the way that they found themselves knocked out of the group stage of Copa America. It's not what we expected. It's not what we wanted. And for a nation that in 2 years' time is hosting a World Cup, if it is a repeat performance of what we saw, my God, we haven't come as far as we thought we've come since the '94 World Cup in the United States by that iconic group of Tony Meola, Marcelo Balboa, Alexi Lalas, Ernie Stewart, Tab Ramos, Johnny Harkes, Eric Winalda and company. I know I'm missing some people here and there, but Clay Coyman, who was my coach when I was 12. I think when we think about the longevity of the timeline that we've seen the growth of soccer worldwide and here domestically, we've got to prove that we've developed further than I think we're trying to convince ourselves we've grown so far.
And on that note, have a wonderful July 4th, everybody. America's Independence Day. It's gone great so far. And this might be the last year of America. So
Jeez.
enjoy it while you've got it, I guess. Good luck with the fascism. And it could also be England's Independence Day as well, and indeed the United Kingdom, as we are about to vote out the populists, culture war, toss rags that have been in charge through 15 years of austerity and Brexit. So enjoy your last Independence Day as we enjoy our first. I've been Tom Rennie. That's been Brian Dunsett. Tim Horsey produced the program. This has been Week in the Tackle. We shall see you next time.